Thank you. Good to see you.
Just so you know, I typically don't tell people I actually know you, so but that's okay. I've been outed here.
So glad you're with us. And of all the hats you wear, you bring a tremendous amount of experience. How about you just do 2 seconds and just do the quick obligatory intro?
I'll give it 1.5 seconds. 28-year career educator, started as a high school math teacher. I've had the blessing to be able to lead schools, lead a school district as a superintendent, and over the last, 5 or 6 years, be able to provide service to schools as the leader of a nonprofit professional development organization.
Take us for a moment, and for those of us who might not know, what is Facing History? What is your org?
So, Facing History and ourselves, we're a professional development organization. We work to lift up primarily history and civics in classrooms across the country, really across the world. Within that work, we prioritize lifting up the most menacing parts of history, genocide, Holocaust, slavery, you name it, and more so than the atrocity itself, but we prioritize the attitudes, the behaviors, the human condition that contributed to people mistreating people. And through that, we're able to give students really good insight into that and bolster their ability to try to prevent atrocities from happening ever again.
We at the Bezos Family Foundation are not only incredibly proud to have supported this event, but also in supporting your work.
Absolutely.
The question I've never asked you is, why did you take the job as CEO?
Why did I take the job as CEO? Actually, the organization was looking for a leader at the very same time that I was actually seeking what to do with myself when I grow up, right? And really how to maximize my impact in the field of education. I'm a former math teacher, as I mentioned, but as I look at our world and seeing the reduction, the elimination of civil discourse between adults primarily, and students not having the opportunity to really do deep dive learning of history, and again, the most menacing parts of history, not in a way that shames or blames, but in a way that enlightens, informs, and empowers students to lead us in a better way.
So let's dive deep. I mean, you raising the topics, they are topics we should not absolutely avoid whatsoever. And so we are in an era, and if you just read or watch the media, where we have highly agitated activist citizens, we have educators who are struggling with all sorts of new guidelines about what you can say, you can't say. We are watching school boards enter areas with lots of trepidation and lots of agitation amongst these and many other topics, including the notion of, what actually is history. It used to be a science when I was in education. What are you facing in the organization, and how are you thinking about these issues?
So there are a couple of things there I would key in on, right? One, I'll talk about the fear and trepidation that teachers are walking into classrooms with right now, regardless of their content. That is probably, as an educator, as a child advocate, as a parent myself, probably priority number one. As I think about education being the intersection of the teacher's humanity with the student's humanity, we have teachers fearful of bringing their full and complete selves into the classroom. That's a problem. And fearful of wanting to tap into the humanity of individual and or groups of children. I think that fear factor puts a glass ceiling on the net impact education could have. That's one. Two, contributing to that is the extreme political polarization that has launched within the walls of education. Being in this career for the last 28 years and being a classroom teacher and school level and district level leader for between the years of 2001 and 2016, I so took for granted what you discussed during the last panel with Secretary Spellings and the bipartisan support of an education agenda. Just totally took that for granted. Lived for a number of years without really any direction from our federal government. And now seeing our teachers and our principals and our school and district leaders basically be treated as a part of the problem or as the enemy as opposed to a part of the solution just really feels problematic.
So, two questions that come out of what you just said, and I really appreciate that and your leadership tremendously. Would probably, if you boil down two areas where we are seeing deep division, it is content, and that content is about history and literature.
Right.
And so, could you talk a little bit about how you actually work with teachers when these issues come up in the classroom and they are feeling very nervous?
So we try to do a couple of things at Facing History and Ourselves. One, we try to arm and empower teachers so they can arm and empower their students with the facts, just the brutal, raw facts, using source documents, using the voices and testimonies of people who were actually there, survivors of the Holocaust, people who walked the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so we try to leverage all that. Then we try to ensure that we are creating a classroom environment where students can study these very troubling topics from the intellectual perspective, from the emotional perspective, and also engage their sense of morality, right? And do all of that while deprioritizing the opinions of the educators in the classroom, right? So this is not about our opinion. It's about how we create the learning environment so that youngsters develop their own opinions around these topics.
I consumed it. We used it as a curriculum when I was a superintendent. I see this. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about something which is really quite amazing to see,
Okay.
and that is the environment for which you create where people can sit close to difference. Students can sit close to difference, and adults can sit close to difference, and have a conversation which seems to escape us right now at a larger area in the country. I don't know if there's a secret sauce, but could you talk a little bit about that? It's such an important skill.
There is no secret sauce. I would first say it is really, really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. We're living through times, and based on one's identity, things happening in the world around us, they're alarming, they're triggering, okay? So that's one, really, really hard. So making sure that we're entering all these spaces with just extreme grace and empathy for individuals is just really, really important. And again, I can't stress enough this notion of not trying to tell kids what to think, but just helping kids to think about the world around them in this context is really important.
Thank you. Could you say a little bit about how Facing History learns itself and the role of student voice in that?
So we spend a lot of time internally grappling with this content, okay, and the debates and the arguments we have internally before we ever create content or curriculum that will face our students and our teachers. We do a lot of work there, right? The last part of that question you asked about
Student voice.
student voice. It's interesting how much the narrative prioritizes student voice and just how much students are not in the picture or not in the room when conversations are being had, right? And so we make sure our students are actually in the room when we are grappling with some of these concepts and content and how we create that which will be placed into classrooms.
I'm going to ask a personal question. You can just say we can move on to the discussion of the
Not in front of all these
49ers if you
people.
want to, but
Well,
known you for a long time,
Yeah.
extraordinary leader, man of color. You're a CEO as you show up in very, very tumultuous times.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how you're managing that?
This is going to sound, I don't know, I guess performative, but I think authenticity is really, really important, right? And so for all leaders, for all educators, I think we have to enter spaces being grounded in who we are, what our own personal values are, and also being appreciative of everyone else's state. I don't hide who I am. I don't hide what my humanity is. I don't hide, what my system of beliefs are. And core to all of that is a total appreciation for all people who may not come from where I am, where I come from, or believe what I believe, right? And so all of that is just really, really important. And as verbose as I'm probably being right now, I find listening is an essential tool, right? To listen to people to the point where you may not agree, but you understand, and you can start to create an intersection
Yep.
between your lived reality, my lived reality. I think that's where the companionship is created and alignment can happen.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. An awesome role model for our young people as well in terms of the program. We have a little bit of time. Let's shift looking forward.
Okay.
Be very interested on your mind the things that are keeping you up at night and the things that are bringing you hope
Yeah. So
and excitement.
I'll start with hope and excitement first. With the time I spend with youngsters, youngsters are bringing to environment a lack of a chip on their shoulders based on identity that I will self-report and say I may have had as a youngster and some of my peers as well, right? I think around race and around economic background, around sexual identity, they're just not coming to the table with some of the hang-ups that my generation and perhaps a generation before came to the table with. That said, largely because of what they're viewing, the ability to have civil discourse probably keeps me up at night, right? The inability to sit with disagreement without being disagreeable keeps me up at night because our government, our Constitution calls for civil discourse. It calls for our disagreement, and it calls for us to like disagree in the same room without bringing harm to each other. I think that's a core principle, and so our inability to do that, our inability to watch communal, institutional leaders do that, for me is problematic and keeps me up at night.
Yeah, thank you. You work across the entire country, and we have a variety of context in the country right now,
Yes, we do.
particularly around the issue of history.
Right.
I'm interested, how do you work with leaders when you might be in one context where we're saying we're only going to discuss this part of history, the US history or world history, and another part over here, and build the coalitions that you've done? Like, how do you do that?
So one, I mean, we're working everywhere across this country and in many places across the globe. And we certainly do understand what you just mentioned around the political context. Keeping it focused on our nation, certainly we know where our extreme liberal communities are and we know where our extreme conservative communities are. We're working in both and everything in between. Again, I'm going to go back to listening. Okay, listening is really, really important. One, to understand what the local contextual priorities are and how we stay true to our commitment while honoring local priorities. Okay, and it does take collaboration. It takes a coordinated effort. There are some communities that we work in that want us to not spend some time on some topics while spending time on others. If we can show up in our most authentic self and bring value to the youngsters, then we'll work with communities. Certainly, there is extremism that exists, and if we can't work with a community or a school in a very authentic way while honoring how they show up with what we think is good and just for children, then we'll politely not work with that community. But we try to find
Yeah.
the common ground.
I want to ask you a question as really a tremendous leader with a phenomenally brilliant background. Could you say a little bit about the age groups that you believe should have the ability to participate in curricular work like Facing History?
The content I mentioned is not just history, but we discuss the most menacing
Tom to
parts
Michael.
of history. And so we believe, it's been a longstanding belief, that that's best done with our middle and high school students.
Okay.
There are opportunities to do it with the younger students as well, but just again, it's emotionally triggering,
Yep.
very, very nuanced. I mean, to be able to sit with
Yeah.
a colleague whose forefathers may have done horrific things to my forefathers, there's a level of maturity that's needed in order for us to have that conversation, right? And we don't shy away
Right.
from any parts of it. And so we've just found that our best entry point are with the older students, middle and high school kids.
Really appreciated the example that you gave. And I would just say one of the hallmarks I find, both in your leadership and in the work, is it's done by invitation, not, quote, indoctrination. And I think when you invite people, like you do and your program does, to actually wrestle with the most menacing components of our history, you have organized and begun this in a very different way
Sure.
than laying this on the table with blame, shame, and
Well, first of all, and not to be too critical, right, but this whole notion of indoctrination, like I will tell you as a parent of a 23 and 20-year-old and as an educator for my entire life, if indoctrinating children was an easy thing, I still have an afro, right? So, like, kids don't just do what you tell them to do.
right.
I wish we could indoctrinate. I start with my two sons. I'd indoctrinate the heck out of them. Kids won't let us
Yeah.
indoctrinate. Okay, we have to earn our right to educate, to communicate, to enlighten. They won't let us do it. So that's one. I mean, kids are great at discernment. Okay,
Yep.
and I really value that out of them. So we don't show up and even try to indoctrinate students. One. Two, our model has proven that teachers of their own free will and accord will identify their own learning gaps, will identify quality professional development resources, and take advantage of all of that without school and district state leaders forcing them to do so, right? So that is a total truth. And what we're finding is that we need to do a better job of engaging our school and district leaders because there's a glass ceiling
Yep.
on total impact if school and district leaders aren't invested in this work.
What I just took away from what you said was, and correct me if I'm wrong, trust the youth and trust the educators.
Absolutely.
We have
Honor the educators as well, please.
just less than a minute. The last topic I'd love to have you talk with us about is the role of parent engagement in the work that you're doing.
What I would say to parents, you heard some of this articulated in the polling that's been done. Essentially, elected officials, current and aspiring, are actually listening to the community, are tailoring their political positioning based on what their research tells them communities want. So I beg of you, communities, ask our politicians, left, right, moderate, for some peace in education. They got to turn down the temperature on the divisiveness and the polarization. Our kids can't thrive when the adults around them, regardless of their positionality, are at each other's throat.
If I had a mic, that would have been the drop the mic moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much,
Thank
much
you.
admired, brother. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. All right, you're welcome.